Marie Curie, the genius who paid the cost of discovery. Have you ever felt like the world was telling you no simply because of who you are? Have you ever been told your dreams are impossible, that you don't belong, that you should give up? Let me tell you the story of a woman who heard no her entire life, but turned every rejection into fuel for her fire. She was not born with privilege. She wasn't born in a country that valued her. She wasn't even allowed to attend university because she was a woman. But through her unbreakable spirit, brilliant mind, and relentless determination, she became the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, the only person to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences, and a pioneer who literally glowed in the dark with her discoveries. This woman is Marie Curie, a name that represents courage, sacrifice, and scientific genius. Her story is not just about discovering elements or winning awards. It's about breaking barriers, defying expectations, and proving that passion and persistence can overcome any obstacle. It's about working in freezing laboratories, facing discrimination, losing loved ones, and still choosing to move forward. Today, we will walk through her incredible journey from a young girl in occupied Poland to becoming one of the most celebrated scientists in history. By the time you finish this story, you'll not only know Marie Curie's life, but also feel inspired to face your own challenges with her same fierce determination. And remember, as we go along, keep learning new English words and phrases. Just like Marie Curie believed in learning something new every single day, even when the world tried to stop her. The girl who refused to stop learning. Marie Curie was born Maria Sklodowska on November 7, 1867, in Warsaw, Poland. But here's the thing. Poland wasn't even a free country at that time. It had been divided and occupied by Russia, Prussia, and Austria. The Russian Empire controlled Warsaw, and they were determined to erase Polish culture, language, and identity. Imagine growing up in a place where speaking your own language could get you in trouble, where your country's history was being erased, where foreign soldiers patrolled your streets. Marie's family was proud and educated, but they weren't wealthy. Her father, Władysław Sklodowski, was a mathematics and physics teacher who believed deeply in education. Her mother, Bronislawa, was a talented pianist and singer who ran a prestigious girls' school. Marie was the youngest of 5 children: Zofia, Josef, Bronislawa, called Bronya, Helena, and Maria, our Marie. From the very beginning, Marie showed an extraordinary mind. While other children played with dolls, Marie was fascinated by the scientific instruments in her father's study. She would stare at glass tubes, scales, and minerals, asking endless questions. Her father once said, "Maria asks why more than any child I've ever known." But Marie's childhood was marked by tragedy. When she was only 8 years old, her oldest sister, Zofia, died of typhus. 2 years later, when Marie was just 10 years old, her mother died of tuberculosis. These losses devastated the young girl. She lost her faith in God and turned to science and reason to make sense of the world. Years later, Marie would say, "Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood." Despite her grief, Marie excelled in school. She had a photographic memory and could learn languages with incredible ease. By the age of 15, she had already mastered Polish, Russian, French, German, and English. She graduated from high school with a gold medal, the highest honors possible. But here's where her real struggle began. In Poland, under Russian rule, women were not allowed to attend university. Can you imagine being the top student in your class, hungry to learn, brilliant beyond your years, and being told, "Sorry, no universities for girls"? This was Marie's reality. While her brother could pursue higher education, she and her sisters were blocked simply because of their gender. Marie was heartbroken, but not defeated. She and her sister, Bronia, made a pact. They discovered something called the Flying University, a secret underground education system in Warsaw, where Polish intellectuals taught banned subjects to students, including women. Classes were held in hidden locations, moving from apartment to avoid Russian authorities. If caught, teachers and students could be imprisoned or exiled to Siberia. For several years, Marie attended these secret classes, studying literature, science, and Polish history. She was learning, but she wanted more. She wanted a real university degree. She wanted to study physics and mathematics at the highest level. But that meant leaving Poland. Marie and Bronia made a deal. Marie would work as a governess to support Bronia while she studied medicine in Paris. Then, once Bronia became a doctor, she would support Marie so she could go to Paris too. This required incredible patience and sacrifice. Marie would have to wait years for her turn. At 18, Marie took a position as a governess with a wealthy family in the Polish countryside. For 3 years, she lived with the Zurowski family, teaching their children. During this time, she fell in love with the family's eldest son, Kazimierz. They wanted to marry, but his parents refused. A poor governess marry their son? Impossible. They forbade the relationship. Marie was devastated. Her heart was broken, her dreams seemed far away, and she was stuck in a job that felt like prison. But even during these dark times, Marie kept learning. Late at night, after her work was done, she would read mathematics and physics books by candlelight. She taught herself advanced concepts that most university students struggled with. She refused to let her circumstances define her future. Finally, in 1891, when Marie was 23 years old, her sister Bronia sent her the letter she'd been waiting for. "Come to Paris. It's your turn now."
The scientist who worked in the cold. When Marie arrived in Paris, she was overwhelmed. The city was beautiful, vibrant, and full of possibilities. But it was also expensive, crowded, and unwelcoming to foreign women. Marie enrolled at the Sorbonne, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, to study physics and mathematics. She was one of only 23 women among 1,825 students. Imagine walking into a lecture hall and seeing rows and rows of men staring at you, whispering, doubting whether you belonged there. Marie's French wasn't perfect, and her previous education in Poland, though excellent, hadn't covered everything the French students had learned. She had to work twice as hard as everyone else just to keep up, and she did. But Marie's life in Paris was brutally difficult. She had almost no money. She rented a tiny attic room in the Latin Quarter, so small she could barely fit a bed and a table. In winter, the temperature would drop below freezing. She couldn't afford coal for heating, so she would pile all her clothes on top of her blanket and still wake up shivering. Sometimes the water in her wash basin would freeze overnight. Food was a luxury Marie often couldn't afford. She would skip meals, surviving on bread, chocolate, and tea. Some days, she was so focused on studying that she forgot to eat entirely. Once, she fainted in the library from hunger and exhaustion. When friends found her, they were horrified by how thin she had become. But none of this stopped Marie. Every day, she walked to the university, she couldn't afford transportation, attended lectures, and then studied in the library until it closed. Then she would return to her freezing room and study by candlelight until she fell asleep at her desk. Her determination was superhuman. In 1893, Marie earned her degree in physics, ranking first in her class. Think about that. A foreign woman studying in her second language, living in poverty with no support system, and she finished first. The following year, she earned a second degree in mathematics, this time ranking second. Marie began working on research projects, and this is when her life changed forever. In 1894, she met Marie Curie. Pierre was a brilliant physicist, 8 years older than Marie. He had already made important discoveries in the field of crystallography. When they met at a scientific gathering, Pierre was immediately struck by Marie's intelligence and passion for science. He had never met a woman who understood physics the way she did. They began talking about science, and the conversation lasted for hours. Pierre later said, "It was like meeting my soulmate, but in the language of atoms and energy." Marie was hesitant about romance. She had been hurt before, and she was focused entirely on her work. But Pierre was different. He didn't want to change her. He didn't want her to give up her dreams. Instead, he wanted to work alongside her. He said to her, "It would be a beautiful thing to spend our lives together working for science." In 1895, Marie Sklodowska married Pierre Curie. She became Marie Curie. But this wasn't a traditional marriage where the woman gave up her career. This was a partnership between two scientists who respected and challenged each other. They worked together, published together, and pushed each other to think bigger. The discovery that glowed in the dark. In 1896, a French physicist named Henri Becquerel made a curious discovery. He found that uranium emitted some kind of mysterious rays that could pass through solid objects and expose photographic plates. No one understood what these rays were or where they came from. Most scientists thought it was interesting, but not particularly important. But Marie Curie saw something others didn't. She decided to make this mysterious phenomenon the subject of her doctoral research. She wanted to understand these rays. Where did they come from? Were other elements doing the same thing? Could this energy be measured? Pierre was so excited about Marie's work that he set aside his own research to help her. Together, they set up a laboratory in a converted shed at the School of Physics where Pierre worked. And when I say shed, I mean it was barely a building. The roof leaked. There was no heating. In summer, it was unbearably hot, and in winter, it was freezing. The ventilation was so poor that fumes from their experiments made them sick. Marie would spend entire days stirring massive pots of boiling pitchblende with an iron rod nearly as tall as she was. The fumes were toxic. The work was exhausting. Her hands became scarred and burned from handling corrosive chemicals. Pierre helped, but Marie did most of the physical labor herself. Imagine working in a freezing shed, stirring a boiling pot of toxic materials, breathing harmful fumes for hours and hours, day after day, for 4 years. Why would anyone do this? Because Marie Curie believed in the power of discovery. She believed that understanding the natural world was worth any sacrifice. In 1898, after months of exhausting work, Marie and Pierre announced the discovery of a new element. They named it polonium, after Marie's beloved homeland, Poland. This was Marie's way of honoring her occupied country and keeping its name alive in the scientific community. But they weren't done. They knew there was still another element in the pitchblende, even more radioactive than polonium. They kept working, kept refining, kept searching. Finally, in December 1898, they announced the discovery of a second new element. They named it radium, from the Latin word for ray. Radium was extraordinary. It was millions of times more radioactive than uranium. It glowed in the dark with a beautiful blue-green light. Marie would later write, "I will never forget the magical glow of those tiny tubes of radium in our dark shed. It was like looking at fairy lights." But here's the thing. Marie and Pierre didn't understand that this magical glow was actually dangerous. They didn't know that radiation could harm human tissue. They would carry test tubes of radium in their pockets. Marie kept a vial of radium by her bedside because she loved watching it glow. They had no idea they were slowly poisoning themselves. The Curie's work coined a new term that Marie herself invented: radioactivity. This word described the spontaneous emission of energy from certain elements. Marie had not only discovered new elements, she had discovered a fundamental property of matter itself. The Nobel Prize and the price of fame. In 1903, Marie Curie was preparing to defend her doctoral thesis, the culmination of all her research on radioactivity. She was nervous. No woman in France had ever earned a doctorate in physics. The examination board consisted entirely of men who would judge whether her work met the highest standards. On the day of her defense, Marie wore her best black dress and stood before the professors. She presented her research clearly and confidently, answering every question with precision. When she finished, the examiners conferred briefly, then announced their decision. Marie Curie had earned her doctorate with the highest honors. The examination room erupted in applause. Marie had become Dr. Marie Curie, the first woman in France to earn a doctorate in physics. But something even bigger was about to happen. The Nobel Committee in Sweden had been following the Curie's work with great interest. In November 1903, the committee announced that the Nobel Prize in Physics would be awarded for research on radioactivity. But here's where things almost went terribly wrong. Initially, the Nobel Committee planned to award the prize only to Henri Becquerel and Pierre Curie. Marie's name wasn't included. Why? Because she was a woman, and the committee members didn't believe a woman could have made such important contributions. They assumed Marie simply assisted her husband. When Pierre learned about this, he was furious. He wrote a letter to the Nobel Committee saying, "If the prize is awarded to me, I will refuse it unless my wife is also recognized. The research on radioactivity is primarily her work. Without her vision and dedication, none of this would exist." The Nobel Committee reconsidered. On December 10, 1903, the Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to Henri Becquerel, Pierre Curie, and Marie Curie. Marie became the first woman in history to win a Nobel Prize. But even this moment of triumph was complicated by sexism. Marie and Pierre were supposed to travel to Stockholm to receive the prize, but Marie was exhausted and recovering from a miscarriage. They couldn't attend the ceremony. When the French press reported on the Nobel Prize, many newspapers focused on Pierre and barely mentioned Marie. Some articles referred to her as Madame Pierre Curie, or the wife of the Nobel laureate. One journalist wrote, "It's charming to see a husband and wife working together, but surely the real scientist is the husband." Marie was frustrated, but not surprised. She had faced discrimination her entire life. She simply kept working. The Nobel Prize brought fame, but it also brought challenges. Suddenly, journalists wanted interviews, photographers wanted pictures, society ladies invited Marie to parties. But Marie hated all of this attention. She wanted to work in her laboratory, not pose for cameras. Pierre felt the same way. They both found the fame exhausting and distracting. Pierre once said to Marie, "I wish we could just disappear and work in peace." Despite the distractions, Marie and Pierre continued their research. They had 2 daughters now, Irene, born in 1897, and Eve, born in 1904. Balancing motherhood and groundbreaking scientific research was incredibly difficult, but Marie managed both with the same determination she brought to everything. Marie's approach to parenting was unconventional. She believed children should be physically active and intellectually curious. She and Pierre would take their daughters on long bicycle rides through the French countryside. They encouraged questions and independent thinking. Marie taught them that being a woman didn't mean limiting your dreams. Tragedy and resilience. April 19, 1906, was a rainy day in Paris. Pierre Curie was crossing the street near the Pont Neuf, distracted and deep in thought about a scientific problem. He stepped into the road without looking. A horse-drawn wagon, unable to stop on the wet cobblestones, struck him. Pierre fell, and the heavy wagon wheel rolled over his head. He died instantly. He was 46 years old, a widow, with 2 young daughters, and a future that suddenly seemed impossible to bear. For weeks, Marie was numb with grief. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped talking. She wrote in her diary, "They filled the coffin and put flowers on it. They closed it and took it away. Pierre is sleeping his last sleep beneath the earth. It is the end of everything.
Friends and family worried that Marie would never recover, but slowly, painfully, she began to function again, and she made a decision that shocked everyone. She would continue the work she and Pierre had started. She would not let his death be the end of their research. She would honor him by pushing forward. The Sorbonne offered Marie Pierre's position as professor of physics. If she accepted, she would become the first woman professor at the Sorbonne in its 650-year history. Marie accepted. On November 5, 1906, Marie walked into the lecture hall for her first class. The room was packed, not just with students, but with journalists, curious onlookers, and people who simply wanted to see if a woman could really teach physics at the university level. The room was silent as Marie stepped to the podium. She opened her notes and began speaking, picking up the lecture at the exact sentence where Pierre had left off in his last class. She didn't give a speech about her grief or her husband. She simply taught physics, brilliantly and clearly. By the end of the lecture, any doubts about her abilities had vanished. Marie Curie was not just filling her husband's position, she was defining her own legacy. But Marie wasn't content with simply teaching. She wanted to continue advancing the field of radioactivity. She worked tirelessly to isolate pure radium, which had never been done before. Radium compounds had been studied, but no one had successfully isolated the pure element. For 4 more years, Marie refined tons of pitchblende, working with even more dangerous materials, conducting thousands of experiments. Her laboratory notebooks from this period are still radioactive today and must be stored in lead-lined boxes. Finally, in 1910, she succeeded in isolating 1/10 of a gram of pure radium. It doesn't sound like much, but this tiny amount proved definitively that radium was indeed an element and allowed scientists to determine its atomic weight precisely. In 1911, the Nobel Committee made an unprecedented decision. They awarded Marie Curie the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for her isolation of pure radium and her studies of radium compounds. Marie became the first person ever to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields. To this day, she remains the only person to achieve this feat in 2 different sciences. But even this incredible achievement was overshadowed by scandal. Just weeks before the announcement, French newspapers published stories claiming that Marie was having an affair with physicist Paul Langevin, who was married. Whether the affair was real or exaggerated by the press, the scandal erupted into a national controversy. The French press was vicious. They called Marie a homewrecker, a foreign temptress, a woman who had forgotten her place. An angry mob even surrounded her home, throwing rocks and shouting insults. Marie had to flee with her daughters to stay with friends. The Nobel Committee sent Marie a letter suggesting she not come to Stockholm to receive her prize because of the scandal. Can you imagine winning the highest honor in science and being told to stay home because of gossip about your personal life? Marie's response was fierce. She wrote back, "The prize has been awarded for the discovery of radium and polonium. I believe there is no connection between my scientific work and the facts of private life. I cannot accept the idea that appreciation of scientific work should be influenced by scandal." Marie went to Stockholm. She accepted her Nobel Prize with her head held high. She refused to be shamed for being a woman with a personal life. The war that changed everything. When World War I broke out in Paris in 1914, Marie Curie was 47 years old and at the height of her scientific career. While most people evacuated Paris or hid in fear, Marie saw the war as an opportunity to help save lives. She realized that soldiers were dying on the battlefield not just from their wounds,
but because doctors couldn't locate bullets and shrapnel inside their bodies fast enough. X-ray machines existed, but they were large, expensive, and located only in major city hospitals. Soldiers in field hospitals had no access to this life-saving technology. Marie had a revolutionary idea. What if she created mobile X-ray units that could drive directly to the battlefield? She threw herself into this project with characteristic determination. Using her Nobel Prize money and donations she personally collected, Marie designed and equipped 20 mobile X-ray vehicles, which soldiers nicknamed Petite Curies, Little Curies. These were essentially vans with X-ray equipment and generators that could be driven to field hospitals near the fighting. But Marie didn't just organize this effort from afar. At 47 years old, she drove these X-ray vans herself, traveling to the most dangerous areas near the front lines. She taught herself to drive, learned basic auto mechanics so she could repair the vehicles, and personally trained 150 female attendants to operate the X-ray equipment. Imagine Marie Curie, a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, driving a van through war zones, setting up X-ray stations under artillery fire, and helping surgeons locate shrapnel in wounded soldiers. She worked tirelessly, often for 20 hours a day, exposing herself to constant danger and massive doses of radiation. Her daughter, Irene, only 17 years old, joined her mother's effort. Together, they traveled to field hospitals, setting up X-ray stations, and training medical staff. Over the course of the war, Marie's mobile X-ray units helped save over 1 million soldiers' lives. Did Marie receive recognition for this incredible humanitarian work? Not really. After the war, the French government gave out honors and medals to many people who had contributed to the war effort. But Marie received nothing. Why? Some historians believe it was because she was a woman, a foreigner, and someone the French establishment still viewed with suspicion after the scandal years earlier. But Marie did the work for recognition. She did it because it was the right thing to do. She once said, "We must believe that we are gifted for something, and that this thing must be attained."
The final years and lasting legacy. After the war, Marie returned to her laboratory, but she was exhausted and her health was failing. Years of exposure to radiation were taking their toll. Her hands were scarred and chronically painful. She developed cataracts that were clouding her vision. She was often weak and dizzy, but she refused to slow down. Marie became the director of the Radium Institute in Paris, a research center dedicated to studying radioactivity and its medical applications. She mentored dozens of young scientists, many of them women, encouraging them to pursue careers in science. She believed deeply in opening doors for the next generation. In the 1920s, Marie made 2 trips to the United States. The American journalist Marie Mattingly Maloney had written a story about how Marie Curie, despite her incredible contributions to science, didn't have enough radium to continue her research because it was so expensive. The story touched Americans' hearts, and they raised money to buy Marie 1 gram of radium. President Warren Harding personally presented it to her at the White House. During these American tours, Marie was celebrated as a hero. Thousands of people came to see her speak. She inspired a generation of young women to pursue science. But Marie found the attention overwhelming. She was a scientist, not a celebrity. She wanted to work, not give speeches. Throughout the 1920s and early 1930s, Marie continued researching and writing. She published books on radioactivity that became standard texts for students. She supervised research projects at the Radium Institute. She watched with pride as her daughter Irene followed in her footsteps, conducting her own groundbreaking research in nuclear physics. But Marie's health continued to decline. She suffered from chronic fatigue, dizziness, and hearing problems. Her blood counts were abnormal. Doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong, but today we know. Marie was dying from radiation exposure. She had spent decades handling radioactive materials with no protection, breathing radioactive dust, and exposing her body to massive doses of radiation. In early 1934, Marie became seriously ill. She developed a fever and had trouble breathing.
Doctors diagnosed her with aplastic anemia, a condition where the bone marrow stops producing blood cells. This was caused by her years of radiation exposure. On July 4, 1934, at the age of 66, Marie Curie died in a sanatorium in the French Alps. She was buried next to Pierre and Suze, just outside Paris. The French government did not give her a state funeral, even though she was one of the greatest scientists France had ever produced. But Marie's legacy was just beginning. Just a few months after her death, her daughter Irene and son-in-law Frédéric Joliot-Curie were awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for their discovery of artificial radioactivity. Marie's younger daughter, Eve, wrote a beautiful biography of her mother that introduced Marie's story to millions of readers around the world. In 1995, 61 years after her death, France finally gave Marie the recognition she deserved. President François Mitterrand ordered that Marie and Pierre Curie's remains be transferred to the Panthéon in Paris, the grand mausoleum where France's greatest heroes are buried. Marie became the first woman to be honored in the Panthéon based on her own achievements, not because she was someone's wife. Today, Marie Curie's name is everywhere. There are Curie Institutes for cancer research around the world. Streets, schools, and universities bear her name. The unit of radioactivity is called the Curie in her honor. Countless women in science cite Marie Curie as their inspiration. The lessons from a life of brilliance and sacrifice. Marie Curie's story is not just about scientific discovery, it's about what's possible when you refuse to accept limitations others try to place on you. Here are the most powerful lessons from her extraordinary life. 1. Your circumstances don't define your destiny. Marie was born in an occupied country, lost her mother young, was denied university education, and lived in poverty. Any one of these challenges could have stopped her, but she refused to let circumstances control her future. She found ways around every obstacle. 2. Persistence beats talent. Marie wasn't the most naturally gifted scientist of her era, but she was certainly the most persistent. She stirred toxic chemicals for years. She taught herself multiple languages. She worked through grief, poverty, and illness. Success came because she never quit. 3. Partnership multiplies impact. Marie and Pierre's scientific partnership shows the power of mutual respect and shared vision. They made each other better scientists. They supported each other's work equally. This kind of partnership, where both people's contributions are valued, can accomplish extraordinary things. 4. Sacrifice is often required for breakthrough. Marie paid a terrible price for her discoveries. She ruined her health, faced constant criticism, lived in poverty for years, and lost her husband tragically. She sacrificed comfort, health, and sometimes happiness for her work. This doesn't mean we should glorify suffering, but it reminds us that meaningful achievements often require giving up something else. 5. Stand up for yourself. When the Nobel Committee tried to exclude her, she didn't accept it quietly. When the press tried to shame her, she refused to hide. When universities wouldn't hire her, she created her own opportunities. Throughout her life, Marie advocated for herself and for women in science. 6. Legacy is about opening doors for others. Marie didn't just achieve success for herself, she mentored young scientists, especially women. She published her work openly so others could build on it. She used her fame to promote science education. She understood that true legacy is about lifting others up.
7. Curiosity is the engine of discovery. Everything Marie achieved started with a simple question: what are these mysterious rays? She followed her curiosity wherever it led, even when others said it wasn't important. Never stop asking questions. Never stop wondering why and how things work. Marie Curie once said, "Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood." Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less. This quote captures her entire philosophy. She believed that knowledge and understanding were the keys to progress, and that fear only held people back from achieving what they were capable of. Why Marie Curie matters today. You might wonder, why does a scientist who died in 1934 still matter today?
Let me tell you why Marie Curie's story is more relevant than ever. First, her research laid the foundation for modern medicine. The radiation therapies that treat cancer patients today, they exist because of Marie Curie's work on radioactivity. The medical X-rays that help doctors diagnose injuries and diseases, Marie pioneered mobile X-ray technology. Nuclear medicine, cancer treatment, diagnostic imaging, all of these fields trace back to Marie's discoveries. Second, Marie proved that gender doesn't determine scientific ability. When Marie was young, many scientists genuinely believed that women's brains were incapable of complex scientific thinking. Marie didn't just prove them wrong, she became one of the greatest scientists of all time. Every woman in science today stands on the foundation Marie built. Third, her story reminds us that diversity in science makes science better. Marie brought a different perspective to physics precisely because she was an outsider. She wasn't trapped by conventional thinking. She asked questions others didn't think to ask. When we exclude people from science based on gender, race, nationality, or background, we limit human knowledge. Fourth, Marie's ethical approach to science is a model we need today. She and Pierre refused to patent the radium purification process, even though it would have made them incredibly wealthy. Why? Because they believed scientific knowledge should be freely available to help humanity. In an era when pharmaceutical companies charge exorbitant prices for life-saving drugs, Marie's example of scientific generosity is powerful. Fifth, her resilience in the face of tragedy and criticism is inspiring. Marie lost her mother, her sister, her husband, and faced constant sexism and xenophobia. She was mocked, excluded, and attacked in the press. But she kept working. She kept pushing forward. She transformed pain into purpose. The woman behind the legend. It's easy to turn Marie Curie into a perfect, untouchable legend. But the real Marie was a complex human being with flaws, doubts, and struggles. Understanding the full person makes her story even more powerful. Marie was deeply introverted and shy. She hated public speaking and found social gatherings exhausting. She was most comfortable in her laboratory, surrounded by test tubes and equations. This made her life as a public figure after winning the Nobel Prize particularly difficult. She was also stubborn and could be difficult to work with. She had exacting standards and didn't tolerate sloppy work. Some of her students found her intimidating. She wasn't warm and fuzzy. She was focused and demanding. Marie struggled with depression, especially after Pierre's death. She went through periods where she barely functioned, where grief overwhelmed her. She was saved by her work, by throwing herself into research that gave her life purpose. She was also, by many accounts, a devoted mother who worried constantly about balancing her scientific work with raising her daughters. She felt guilty about the time she spent in the laboratory. She wondered if she was doing right by her children. These are struggles that working parents, especially working mothers, still face today. Marie loved the outdoors. Some of her happiest moments were taking long bicycle rides with her family, swimming in the sea, or hiking in the mountains. These activities restored her energy and helped her think through scientific problems. She was also proudly Polish her entire life. Even though she spent most of her adult life in France, she never forgot her roots. Naming polonium after Poland was a political act, a way of keeping her country visible when it had been erased from maps. Understanding these human details makes Marie more relatable and her achievements even more impressive. She wasn't superhuman. She was a regular person who chose to work extraordinarily hard and refused to give up on her dreams. Your turn to write history. Marie Curie's journey from a young girl in occupied Poland to a two-time Nobel Prize winner is one of the greatest stories in science and human achievement. But here's the most important thing. Her story is not finished. The doors she opened, the barriers she broke, the knowledge she uncovered, all of these continue to ripple forward through time. Every scientist working on cancer treatments today is continuing Marie's work. Every woman who pursues a career in STEM fields is walking a path Marie helped clear. Every person who refuses to accept limitations based on their gender, nationality, or background is honoring Marie's legacy. So what does this mean for you? Whether you dream of becoming a scientist, a teacher, an artist, an entrepreneur, or anything else, Marie Curie's life offers you this promise. The obstacles in your path are real, but they are not insurmountable. The people who doubt you might be loud, but they don't define what you're capable of. The work might be hard, the sacrifices might be real, but the impact you can have is limitless. Marie Curie once said, "Be less curious about people and more curious about ideas." This doesn't mean don't care about people. Marie cared deeply about humanity. It means don't waste energy on gossip, comparison, and judgment. Focus your energy on learning, creating, and contributing. She also said, "I was taught that the way of progress was neither swift nor easy." This is perhaps her most important message. Success isn't instant. Breakthroughs don't happen overnight. Marie spent 4 years refining pitchblende to discover radium. She spent decades advancing the field of radioactivity. She worked in freezing sheds, through illness, through grief. Progress was slow and painful, but it was also real and lasting. When you feel like giving up on your dreams, remember Marie stirring that toxic pot of pitchblende day after day, year after year, because she believed in the importance of discovery.